Continuing the newly started series here on the Ramchal's Ma'amar Ha'ikarim, which is essay on the fundamentals, where he basically put forth in more straightforward terms a lot of the major concepts that he explores in Derech Hashem. And that's why this essay is often printed at the back of Derech Hashem, which is the text that you have. We find that the first section of the essay that we discussed yesterday is basically exploring ideas about God, Creator. And if I could just make a simple review of what we discussed yesterday, it would basically be what I understand to be what the Ramchal is saying, which I understand to be based on the Rambam, which I understand to be saying as follows, is that things don't come from nothing. Nothing comes from nothing, which means that something comes from something. Any something comes originally from one creator that brought everything into existence and itself was not created. If it was created, then it's a creation, it has a creator. There must be only one being which created everything and brought all of those things into being. Why only one? Because by definition, the creator of everything must be outside of everything, which means the creator is outside by definition of place. And since it's outside of place or space, it's by definition outside of time, which makes the creator infinite, right? Non-finite. Now, just being non-finite doesn't mean necessarily that there can only be one non-finite being or reality. And we explained how, for example, through a simple mathematical example, you can have an infinite number of parallel infinities. For example, line by line by line by line by line, where each line represents infinity, and parallel lines can go on that way infinitely. So you actually have an infinite number of parallel infinities. However, that would, according to what I posited, only be describing a reality which is only relatively infinite. When we're talking about this creator which brought everything into being, it also brought into being the plane of relative infinities. So it is outside of the plane of relative infinity as well, making it absolutely infinite. And there can only be one being which includes within it everything physical and everything non-physical, making it absolutely infinite. And therefore there can only be one. This is more or less in a nutshell what we discussed yesterday. Fair enough? Okay. I think we also discussed that even though the absolute, infinite creator is outside of space and outside of time, insofar as it's independent of all of that, nevertheless, there is really, given the fact that the creator is absolutely infinite, there is absolutely nothing other than it. Since it is absolutely infinite, there can be nothing, right? Absolutely nothing other than it. Which means that everything is really God. And Einod Milvado. There is nothing other than God. Which means all of what we perceive to be physical finite creation, or even that we can contemplate as metaphysical creation, is really God. And we described how, again, through a mathematical analogy, that can be understood as a segment which is generally perceived as, or conceptualized as being something which is finite, nevertheless has the character of infinity insofar as there are a number of infinite number of points within that segment. Meaning the segment itself has the degree of infinity of the line of which it's a part. So too, creation has within it the degree of infinity of which it's a part. That is the absolute creator. Okay? If we perceive physical creation as something separate for God, or if we conceptualize the non-physical realm of creation as being something separate from God, that's just a facade. That's not actually the truth on the real level. If God, from God's perspective, were to perceive itself, it sees only itself. Right? It doesn't see a separate metaphysical realm or a separate physical realm. It sees itself everywhere. Of course, it's aware of the appearance of there being a kind of, relatively infinite realm or a finite realm. but it actually sees the reality that these are just garments, as it were, which enclose the reality of the presence of God everywhere. Okay, this is a point that's developed in the Nefesh HaChaim more. Okay, but as far as the creation is concerned, it does not see clearly God everywhere. Rather, it conceives of a intermediary non-physical realm that we call the spiritual worlds, and we see a physical world, and that's how we're supposed to act and interact with the world. That's what we're act and that's what we're supposed to understand, comprehend, and interact with the world. Okay. But this imposition of the ability to conceive of a relatively infinite realm, or to see a physical realm, that's the result of tzimtzum. It's another point we mentioned yesterday, right? Where tzimtzum is the withdrawing of God behind, or the withdrawing of God, which enables the perception of there being something other than God. First, by creating space through withdrawing from space, right? And then by filling that space with multiplicity, which comes about through the absence of God in that place. I don't mean to say the absence of God, but the concealment of God within that place. So tzimtzum is concealment in a certain respect. Okay? I don't think if we spoke in class, or maybe it was only afterwards when we spoke about it a little bit, or maybe we did on call, that according to this way of viewing things, all of creation didn't come into being as a result of God's proactively creating, but actually as a result of God's withdrawing and concealing. The further God withdrew and concealed, the more other things could be perceived as existing separate from God. And therefore, multiplicity in creation actually represents a deeper regression of God away from creation. That's what we left off with, right? So that the pinnacle of creation, mankind, which we generally consider to be the greatest crowning jewel of creation, is actually, in many ways, the furthest away from God than any other aspect of creation. Yet man is described as being the closest to any. Yeah. Why is this? Why is this? It's through the virtue of free will. What makes human beings, or gives them the potential to be godlike, is free will. That free will only comes about as a result of multiplicity. If something, to the extent to which something is simple, it is simply attached to God. To the extent to which you have multiplicity, it gives variations and alternatives, as it were, to God. The greatest variation and alternative you can have to God is another being, which is God-like, the human being, with free will. So ultimately, man's potential to be godlike necessarily results from his being furthest away, as it were, from God, right? So that it should not be imploded or connected or subservient to or secondary to God. In which case, it would be like a stone or a tree or an animal. So it's the actual withdrawing of God which results in the sophistication of man, and it's that very sophistication which enables men to choose to be godlike or to choose the opposite. A stone doesn't have that option. Right? Animals don't have that option. Even though we have an entire work called Perek Shira, which describes the way in which inanimate objects, plants and trees, animals and birds, all praise God with Perek Shira, praise God with awareness of God. That's not something that they're doing from their own free will. On the contrary, it's because they were created closer to God, meaning they represent a lesser degree of tzimtzum, they have a lesser degree of sophistication, so in many ways they are more harmonized with God, and therefore they reverberate with the praise of God naturally, instinctually, which is not the case regarding human beings. Human beings have to cognize God, they have to think about God, they have to accept God or believe in God, make the decision to follow God. These are all things which the human is required to do. Animals don't make those decisions. They're on a very high level insofar as they're closer to God in the realm of creation, but they're on a lower level insofar as they're lacking sophistication. So it's their lack of sophistication which enables them to reverberate the message of God, be in tune with the will of God, and that's why they act purely instinctively, which is the way they were programmed. Human beings are not like that. They were created further away from God, a greater degree of tzimtzum, allowing a greater degree of possibilities, a greater expression of multiplicity, which culminates in the power of free will, enabling the same human being to deny God as well as affirm God. Right? In this way, humanity was the last of creation, the pinnacle of creation, the furthest away from God, but therefore having the greatest potential to come close to God through the act of free will. These are some of the ideas that we discussed yesterday, elaborating on the last point a little bit more, I think. So let's continue now on page 171, the second paragraph. Hamatzu Ezeh, you have it, Rabbi Orcha? Hamatzu Ezeh Yisbarach, this being, Hu Matzui Sholem, it is perfect, a perfect being. B'chol minei shlemos, in any possibly conceivable form of perfection. Ein bo shum chisoron klal v'ikar, it is not lacking or deficient in any way at all. It by definition must be perfect, beyond, a perfection beyond the state of perfection that we can even conceive. But insofar as it is the absolute, infinite progenitor of all, it must contain everything within it to the perfect degree, and it's therefore lacking any deficiency. That's the first point. Secondly, it's not dependent on anything either. Why? Because it is the progenitor of everything, and itself was not created by anything. So it's not dependent on anything at all. Right? Everything, on the contrary, is dependent on it. And it's not impressed, meaning it's not affected in any way by anything other than itself at all. There can be also, by definition, no beginning and no end to this being at all. Why no beginning? Since it is solely a creator and not a creation, it itself has no beginning. Since it is absolutely infinite and contains within it everything, similarly, it can have no end. V'lo sof klal. So it has no beginning or no end. Perush, sholunis have achar ha'heder. It didn't come into being after not existing. V'lo yeveu oheder klal. And it will not be brought to a state of not existing either. That's what it means to say. It has no beginning and no end. There's no scenario where it was brought into being where it didn't exist beforehand. And there's no scenario where, existing now, it will cease to exist sometime in the future. Kind of touching on the idea we were exploring yesterday about whether God itself can will itself out of existence. Aval tomid haya v'tomid ihye. It always was, and it always will be. I efshar hedro klal uklal. And it is impossible that it not exist. Right? So here's touching the point that we were saying yesterday, that can God will itself out of existence? The answer to that question is no. Just like you would say God can't create a stone that it can't lift. But when you say no, you're not answering that God is limited. Here, we found something that God can't do. God can't will itself out of existence. No. What you're doing is you're actually expressing the greatness of God. God cannot, as it were, will itself out of existence because God's absolute infinity necessitates its existence. It can simply not exist. Right? God's greatness, it's God's very greatness which prevents there being a scenario where God would not exist. Not that God is limited in something that he can do, but his greatness is so great that it cannot be. That's kind of the way, that's another way of putting it. That's why it says here. Husibas kol havim is the cause of all things, vein olav siba acheres, and there is no source or cause which is operative upon it at all. Elohu me'atzmo mukrach amitzius, but its existence is imperative. Right? The existence is imperative. So here, you could ask the question, okay, fine, but still, where did God come from? Because we said, it's not our experience, right, and it's not our understanding, it's that things come into being on their own, or that things exist without having been brought into being. So in the end,
it came from his creator.
So then it was created. I mean, he's saying that God never was brought into being, and God will never cease to exist.
And he always exists.
Yes. So where did God come from? Things don't just come from nothing. Things must come from something.
So where did he come from?
That's the question.
What's the answer?
I don't know. I mean, this you get into a realm, like somebody mentioned here yesterday, which is, in the end of the day, since we are human beings and we were created within the confines of the created world, we can only surmise a certain degree about God, and even then it's only surmising. We can't know for sure. Language breaks down when we want to try and understand or even discuss the true nature of God. But beyond that, there's a point where we can't even speak or let alone think about what God's existence really means. And if we say it's not our experience that things come about from nothing, that something exists that points to a something, that's only something within the physical realm. This is a law that applies to the finite realm. Or you might even be able to extend it to the realm of the relative infinite, the relatively infinite. But when you're talking about something which is absolutely infinite, containing within itself everything, and there being absolutely nothing other than it, you can't say, there's nothing we can say about where it came from, or whether it had to have had a beginning at all. And that's already a realm, which is, I believe, personally, in my own investigations, although there's always possibilities for learning more, that humanly impossible to understand or to know where God came from. God did not come from anything. God always was. And I'm not talking about in terms of the concept of time, because we're talking about even before time. Right? Before time. Outside of place and time, there was and is a reality of God which has no beginning or no end. It simply always is. In the past it was, in the present it is, in the future it will be. Yeah, but in truth it always is. It just simply is. Why? Just that's the way it is. I don't know at that point whether we have an explanation. I personally don't. Other than trying to suggest that, I don't know, if God is outside of place and time, then God is independent of place and time, and therefore God preceded time, exists concurrently with time, and will continue to exist even if time ceases to exist. God's presence is independent of time. Since it's not a function of time, it's just simply always is. Right? Something like that. What are you saying?
We're not obligated to know that. We're obligated, it says that there is a God, it says in the Rambam, Yesh Matsui, that's controlling the whole world.
Yeah.
That's
well, we are. I don't know why. My understanding is we're required to know as much about God as we possibly can. I mean, if you're required to know that God exists, then that means that you're opening up a whole realm of understanding. What does that mean? For one person, it means one thing. For another person, it might mean another. For a person who's intellectually capable, might understand it to this extent. To another person, but yadat hayom. You have to know God. So what does that mean? It means doing the best you can to gain as much knowledge as possible about God. At some point, there's a threshold which nobody can understand. But I see what you're saying. It doesn't seem to be correct, though, to say that we're only required to know that God took us out of Egypt, for example, or that God created. But if you have to know that God created, then you have to know what God is, and you have to know what creation is, and you have to know what creation is for. I mean, that term involves a lot of details. So our knowledge of God should be as inclusive as possible. The person should be required to push himself as far as possible to get to know as much about God as is possible for him, and as far as it's humanly possible. You're just trying to get, looking for the easy way out, Mordechai.
Yeah, but what is God? I mean, responsibility to be chayiv something, chayiv misa, something like that.
Yeah.
He's only obligated to know that.
You have to know that this is a transgression and what the what the punishment would be.
Yeah, right. Who says this?
Fine, all that's true, but that's in the realm of action. But here we're talking about the realm of the belief. The belief. It's the realm of belief. Od tzarich sheteda, and further you must know, shel matzui hazeh yisbarach shemo, that this being, may his name be blessed, ein bo. I think in my version the last letters have been cut off here. It should be ein bo shum. Ein bo shum hakova. It has no. Anybody have the English translation? It has no pieces. It has no component parts, perhaps.
No structure.
No structure. Okay. V'lo ribui b'shum panim, and it has no multiplicity at all. Eluhu pashut betachlis hapshitus, but it is simple to extreme degree of simplicity. What does he mean by this? It's like one. It's simple insofar as it doesn't have a structure of component multiple parts. God is absolutely one. Vein shayach bo shum inyan mi'inyane hagufim, and it's not relevant to God any matters having to do with physical objects, umikrehem, or the things that happen to these physical objects. V'u meshulal mikol gvul v'goder, and he is void of or exempt from any limitation or boundary. Mikol yachas u'mikol chok tivi, or any relationship or any type of natural law. That's quite interesting. So God is purely simple, with no structure, and certainly not made out of component parts. It's not subject to any of the experience of physical things or the forces that act upon them. And it's totally independent of any natural law as well.
But he's the one who put the law in.
He's the one that put the law in, but he's not subject to it.
But it's part of it.
Didn't you say that yesterday?
Yesterday.
Yeah, so now you're changing your mind?
No,
Yeah.
I'm still holding that there are laws in creation. There are laws. You can't surpass the laws as human beings, as
Right.
nature. You can't
Right,
surpass.
right.
But it's still a part of God.
Okay, so that's why I saw like the contradiction, which is God is absolutely one and independent of multiplicity.
Right.
Part of multiplicity would be the laws of nature. Yet, what you're saying is if God is actually absolutely everything, then creation is God, and the same laws that govern creation would govern God.
Not only that part.
That part of God? God has no part.
No parts.
Right, so we're touching on a problem here, right? So which is where I was hoping we would go, which was if God is everything, yet the world is a world of multiplicity, and that multiplicity is actually God itself. It's just God is concealed within a deeper layer of that multiplicity that came into being in that space, which became the place. So how is it that the laws and the physicality don't govern God's presence there? How can we describe God as being one there when in fact we see multiplicity? Like there seems to be like a dichotomy here, right? Some type of a tension. So the way I kind of make sense of this and try and reconcile it is as follows, is that if you think about maybe light. white, indifferentiated, brilliant, pristine white light. There is actually a spectrum of colors there, which represent multiplicity. Right? If you were to refract those aspects from the light, they would seem to be independent of the light from which they come. But in truth, that's not the case. They're just projections.
They're just viewed differently.
Yes, they're projections of that one light from which they come, and they're viewed as projections, as being something separate. But just as they come out of the white light, they can be refracted back into it as well. So that you can have a scenario where simultaneously you have something which seems perfectly simple in one, which has within it the presence of multiplicity, or the presence of what appears to be multiplicity, when really all that multiplicity is really being generated from one source, which is the white light. So that, using that analogy, maybe we can think about the world of multiplicity as well. The world of multiplicity is a projection which is generated or energized from the underlying source, which is the perfect unified presence of God in everything. Only it's projected in a way which makes it seem like it's different, even though all of its existence is dependent entirely on the energy from which it's a projection. Or another example that you can think about, which also involves light, is like a movie. Yeah, that white light is being directed through the filter of the film, and then the filter of the film is being projected onto the screen, so that when you look at the screen, you're actually seeing what looks to be a realm of multiplicity, when in truth, it's really just a manifestation of the light from which it's a source. And when you shut off the camera, the movie stops. Right? Right? So the same thing here is that we're seeing a projection of the reality of God as the divine energy is being filtered through the process of tzimtzum, and the resulting tzimtzumed projection gives us the impression that there's multiplicity, when really it's an illusion. Just like the drama that's taking place on the on the screen, is illusory. It seems real, it feels real, you can become very enthralled and embroiled in what's going on there, but in truth, it's not real. And it's only coming from the source, which is the light. Without the light, it ceases to exist. So you have simultaneously the source and the multiplicity, right, which are operating in unison. Where in truth, the underlying simplicity of the light is what's generating everything and even allowing the seeming existence of the multiplicity. But it's really all one. It's like different facets of that one. So here too as well then, yeah? What's happening is God is projecting itself. Well, it's not really projecting itself. What's really happening is, well, it's both. I mean, the intensity of God's presence is being withdrawn so that filters are, as it were, brought into being. The remaining light is directed through those filters and projecting that energy into a place, which gives the impression that there's something there other than the underlying light from which it emerges. Yeah? There are laws which govern the way that illusion works. But those laws don't govern the source of the illusion, which is the energy itself, the presence of God. So in no way is God, limited by, for example, the force of gravity. But gravity is a force that works within the illusion. Right? And it seems very real. Just like if somebody takes a punch in that movie that we're embroiled in, yeah? The one who's watching the movie like this. What are you dodging from? Yeah? You know what I'm talking about, Jeremy? Yeah? Well, your heart starts pounding because of some love story that's taking place. What are you getting all excited about? It's just a billboard. I mean, there's nothing real about that. What are you getting so excited about? So the laws themselves don't govern the reality of the illusion, but they operate within the context of that illusion. Okay? Is that a way of explaining what we're talking about? The laws and limitations don't affect, therefore, God. On the contrary, that's just the way the system works. Right? So the light projects the image on the film onto the screen, and the result is that it looks like this, It looks like a place. It looks like there are people moving. It looks like objects are having effect one on the other. Yeah, but clearly, none of that's really taking place, and it certainly has no bearing on the light, which is projecting all of that. Yeah, somebody throws a punch at the other piece of light on this.
So then, is the world a projection of? You see, the world existence is projection of God.
Yeah, and that's why we call the world Olam. What does Ullman mean? What does Ullman mean? It means concealment. I guess it means something like that, yeah? Concealment. It means concealment. It is so Olam is or Olam means facade. It's the facade. It's a facade. That's what the Olam is. It's a facade. It's just it's a stage. Yeah? That's what Ullman is. The created world is a projection behind which God is concealing itself. That's what Ullman means. So the revealed world, is really concealing. Yeah, it's really concealing the presence of God, and it's our job to play spiritual hide and seek. Yeah, with God, peel away that symptom. Yeah. Are you there? Where are you? Sometimes God goes, peekaboo. And then he goes like this. You have to look for him again. Where is he? So some places where God goes peekaboo, like the kotel. Peekaboo. Yeah? There's a lesser degree of concealment there, a lesser degree of tzimtzum, and therefore a greater revelation of God's presence. It's not that God's presence is greater in the kotel, for example, or in the Beis Hamikdash than it is elsewhere. Right? The presence is not greater. The concealment is less. Okay? So think about, for example, again, it always works, the light analogies work here. If you have a floodlight, and you have a curtain, and a curtain, and a curtain, and a curtain, and a curtain, 10 curtains, okay? And you look through the curtains in order to see the light, you're not going to see very much light at all. Does that mean the light is shining less brilliantly? No. The light is constant. Reveal a curtain or two, all of a sudden you start to see more. Reveal more curtains, you start to see more. The light is stronger. That's not true. It's not that the light is strong. The light was equally present in all scenarios. It's just it was either concealed to a greater or lesser extent. And that's the idea of holy people, holy places, right? They're tapping into, or they're peeling away, i.e. peeling away more of the tzimtzum, and therefore getting closer to the source. It seems like there's more of a revelation of the divine there, right? But that's not true. I mean, the divine presence is equally everywhere. It's the tzimtzum which changes. Okay? So God before creation, during creation, and after creation, it's all the same, right? It's just that on that kind of part of the spectrum, which we call physical reality, there's a greater degree of tzimtzum, more curtains, and therefore we see less of the divine presence, which is equally everywhere at all times and outside of time and place as well. Okay? But in any case, those curtains are types of, realms of creation, planes of creation, and each has its own limitations, which we call laws, including the laws of nature. But you can see, using this analogy of the curtains and the light, that the curtains in no way have a bearing on the light itself. And so therefore you can have a reality where, you have a light and you have curtains, and the curtains occlude that light, but they in no way affect the light itself. So the laws of nature operate within the system of occlusion. They're part of the natural world, but the fact that they exist in no ways limits the light behind them. Right? It just limits our ability to see it, but it's certainly there, and it's not bound by, the light is not bound by the curtains, it's not affected by, it's not dimmed. The light itself is not dimmed by the curtains, it's only occluded. But the curtains don't affect the quality of the light. The light is not bound by those curtains. It's occluded. So the same thing as well. The laws of nature are part of those layers which occlude the visibility of God, but not the presence of God, and therefore they don't affect the quality of God either. Okay. So the next paragraph.
There's a saying. The world is a stage and we are the actors.
The world's a stage and we're the actors. Okay. So according to this, right, the world's a movie, and we're the beings of light that dance across the screen. Va'alakol, above all, tzarich sheteda, you must know, she'amitos in yono u'mitziuso isbarach eina museges klal. The true meaning or matter of God and the true element of His existence is incomprehensible at all. Okay? Everything that we've been speaking about until now is really just an attempt to approximate what we can extrapolate about God, but we can't know for sure, and it's beyond our comprehension and truth. Ve'ena dimion im shum echad me'inyonov shebebruim, and there's no true comparison or point of comparison between God and any of the things that were created by it. V'im shum echad me'ayetzurim shemedami dimion umaskil lesechel. So it can't be compared to any created object, nor can it be fully comprehended by any being of intelligence or measure of intelligence. Ve'en milois use'orim shehiruyim lo. Nor are there words or descriptions that are truly befitting and appropriate for Him. Ve'no'osim elav. Appropriate for Him. Be'emes, in truth. So that language, so not only are our thoughts ultimately limited in our ability to actually understand the true essence of God, even more so language, which is certainly a less powerful vehicle than thoughts. So certainly language is going to be limited in describing God. We can only approximate and, like I said, extrapolate and did I use the word approximate? Yeah. Our thoughts, understanding, and description of God. Ultimately, it's beyond our comprehension. Why? Because thoughts are really a product of our minds. Our minds are a function of our bodies. And language is a function of our ability to speak. But it's all centered around our physical plane of existence. Thoughts, true, can transcend above the physical. But they're limited to ultimately being experienced within the confines of a person. Or at least are limited as long as they are within the confines of a person. Maybe thought process, if it continues after death, would be liberated to a greater extent. But certainly, so far as the mind, by which I mean to say the intelligence, as opposed to the brain, which is an organ of thought, but the mind, thought itself, as long as it's within the confines of a living human being, is going to be limited to the experiences of a human being. And even if it can transcend above that, contemplating intellectual, spiritual thoughts or ideas, it's only going to set the mind in a trajectory toward God, but it can never actually get there or fully grasp it either. Therefore, it can only approximate. And when you try and mitzamtzem the mechshava, the thought, into dibur, it's going to be even more limited. Avan nedaber bo kol ma shenedaber b'milos al derech hashala v'hataka. Therefore, any ability, any attempt to discuss God through the vehicle of language can only be, at best, metaphorical, allegorical, so that we can understand to the best of our ability what it is that we can think about or communicate about God. Since our language is actually a construct of our experiences in the physical world, the natural laws, which involve limitation and boundary of created objects, it's impossible to speak with words other than these, which are themselves therefore bound and limited. This is therefore a very important qualification to keep in mind whenever we are thinking about, explaining, or speaking about matters having to do with God's essence itself. She'ein ha'te'arim v'ha'milos ha'misyachas loy misyachas al tzad ha'emes, that the thoughts and the words that we associate with God are not true associations. They're only metaphors and allegories. Ela al tzad ha'ashala, it's just borrowed terms. V'lo zulas, and nothing other than this. And he says, v'zor b'zeh me'od. And therefore we have to be careful about this, very much so. So on the one hand, we are required to know God, to comprehend God, and do so to the greatest extent possible. And that's going to vary from person to person and age to age and so forth and so on. That being said, whatever a person feels he's able to understand, extrapolate, describe, contemplate about God, he's got to realize that it's very far from the mark. It's not the true essence of what God really is, nor is his verbiage about it a true expression of what it really is. It's all just an approximation and a metaphor. And that's why when we talk about these concepts, we naturally start thinking about analogies, like light, or beings, or things like that. Because these are things which are very untangible, beyond human comprehension, things which we can only describe through extrapolation, and therefore we use analogies. And it's important to therefore know that whatever vocabulary or way of thinking a person kind of feels comfortable with about speaking or thinking regarding God, he should try and not be comfortable with that.